So now let's take a look and implement links in our example application. We head over to Visual Studio. We're going to take a look at the models folder. And before we can change our application to support links, we're going to need a model for a link itself. So I'm going to create a new class and I'm just going to call it a link model. Let's use some snippets to create our individual pieces. So I'm going to have an href, a rel. We saw both of these in the example. I'm also going to include two more, and one is going to be a method. That way we can hint if the operation is not a get, if it's a post, a put, a delete, etc. And finally, I'm going to have a boolean in here for is templated. Is templated is an indicator of whether the href has template elements. There's a standard for using templates inside of an href. We're not going to really cover is templated, but I'm going to show you what a link should typically look like. Now that we have a model for our link, let's head over to the diary model, and let's replace our URL here with a collection of link models. And let's just call those links. Here we're going to continue to supply an URL that represents the item itself, but also gives us the ability to add additional links for other operations as necessary. And we're also going to need to go into the model factory and change our code to support that. So if we look for the create that is creating the diary, we'll see where we're specifying the URL here for the diary. But since that's gone, let's go ahead and change this to include our new links. And I'm just going to use a collection initializer to include a number of these links. So we know that one of our links we want to be the same as we were specifying here for our URL. Let's go get rid of that URL. But the links themselves aren't just strings. Remember, they're these more complex structures. So let's create a new method called createLink that's going to take one or more parameters. For our first parameter, we're going to always include the URL that is generated by the URL helper. For our second parameter, we're going to include a string, and in this case, it's just going to be called self. So at a minimum, we're going to want to supply the href part of the link and then the rel part of the link that we're going to generate. So let's use refactoring and generate this stub for us. We're going to want to have other people creating links, so let's go ahead and make this public. So this is going to be our href, and this will be rel. And all we're going to do is return a new link model, and we're going to set href equals href, rel equals rel. But remember, we also have the method and the is templated, right? So let's actually support those in createLink as well, but let's not have to supply them. So let's say string method equals get, and bool is templated equals false. So for our use, we're going to default back to a get and is templated equals false, so we can go ahead and say that the method is going to be and is templated. So we're now creating that link. Let's make sure that we compile. And here we can see that we need to deal with the diary needing to parse that URL. So in this case, we're just going to make a little change. We're going to say, let's call it self-link, and we're going to say model.links, where rel equals self, first or default. So we're going to go ahead and grab that self-link if it exists. So if the self-link does not equal null and the self-link.href is not empty, then we should be able to just specify the URI using that. And that way we can parse and get out that ID like we did before. Let's see if we have any other places. And let's go ahead and just make sure that we put that and in there that I'd missed. Let's build that. And if we go back to the browser and look at this diary, we can now see instead of that URL, we're getting a link that includes the entire piece of data we had expected. Here's our method, here's our templated, rel, and href. So in the usual case, you're going to be creating more than one link. So let's create a couple more. Let's create a new diary entry. And of course, the method for a new entry is going to be post. But of course, our link won't be the same. We're going to need to go after diary entries as a route. But we can just use this same link for the diary ID. If we build this, and refresh, we can see we have our new entry. It's including the different information we're supplying, and we're saying, hey, when you want to post a new diary entry, here is the href for this individual diary. It's going to give them some information about what has to be done. It's not being incredibly useful for saying what's the structure of a new entry, any of that. That's still going to need to be something you're going to need to document and share with the users, but this will hint at them additional links, and it's very common to have more than one link for each particular entity. Putting these links inside of the entity itself and having it being self-describing is useful in our case because it may be that individual entities have different operations. So being able to have these links go to individual states, like we had talked about earlier, the example of this being an invoice, and one invoice may have an operation to say send to fulfillment because it's in that state, whereas the second invoice may have its own set of self-describing link that says send to approval because it's in that state. So the links that are included here may be very dynamic. It may not be the same links are going to be included for each and every version of an entity that is returned from your API. Let's look at a different place where this can be useful. If we go back and look at our controllers, let's go to that foods controller. And if you remember, we were doing this trick where we were building up the link for the previous and next URL. And that's interesting, but instead of including both of these, and remember, let's actually show you in the browser, we're including an empty string for the previous page URL because there isn't a previous page, and then a next page URL for what is the next page. And as we go to the state where we have a previous and a next, we're filling them out. And that's fine, but I hate including the empty one when we don't really need it. And that's where we could benefit from actually creating a collection of our link model and then adding to it. So we can just say if page is greater than 0, links.add, and in this case I'll add a new link by calling the model factory create link. Remember we had made it public earlier. And we can keep what the helper is giving us, but then pass in what would be the rel, which would be next page. And we'll leave it as a get and non-templated because that's fine. And we'll do the same thing we were doing here. If, let's borrow this little if, links.add, the model factory create link. And then at the end of this, we'll name this previous page. And we'll just do the same thing here. If, and let's borrow this little if from our earlier implementation. Links.add, the model factory.create link. Same helper link, except that here we'll say next page. Now that we've added links specifically for previous and next as necessary, we can replace what we're returning here with just a new member called links. That will be serialized as a collection of these links. If we go to the foods, we can see that we now have one and only one link because there is only a next page. And if we click on it, we'll then get a previous page and a next page based specifically on the links that are valid for this particular URI. And so we can use this concept of links both in a strongly typed sense with what we're generating for our models, like our diary models and our food models, but we can use those same ideas to augment the results we're getting like we did here in foods. And I'll propagate these changes to all the different objects before you get the source code, assuming you have a Pluralsight Plus subscription. I'm not going to waste your time here in the video repeating this process for each of the different entities and models in our system, but you can expect that that's what you would want to do, replace all the URLs with links.